What made you quit a job on the spot? Story 1. I'm a physician assistant and took a job at an urgent care. After working there for about a month, I noticed some irregularities, such as some medications being expired and sometimes a lack of supplies. I wrote that off as the office manager not being as astute as she should have been and brought it up to the doctor that owned the place. He said he would talk to her and straighten it out. Then one of the medical assistants came to me and said, this has been going on forever, right? She then said things would never change and to get used to it because the expired medications had been on the shelf for months and they were told to never throw them out. She then told me that the autoclave, the machine that sterilizes instruments, was broken, and all they did was wash the instruments in soap and water and put them in the autoclave anyway to get them as clean as possible. That was the end of that. I made out a formal complaint to the state medical board and never showed up again. The state actually came in the very next day and raided the place. They shut him down immediately. They found so many things wrong that not only did they keep the place out of business, they suspended his license. He was also prosecuted on federal charges because he was running a scam for truck driver physical exams. Story 2. I worked for a T-Mobile store. Authorized reseller, not an actual dealer. One week, I had an amazing week. Sold 55 phones, brand new activations on a business account with 55 high-end phones at that time. When I got my next check, they said my paperwork was not in order and thus they couldn't pay me. As a side note, they always told us to make copies of all paperwork in case this happened so you can show it to the manager and get it resolved within a day. I went over my backup paperwork with my boss. He said everything looked to be in order and he would have the office cut me a check. I went to the office and they told me it was still not in order. I immediately gave them my store key and quit on the spot. I did go through collections and they did settle before I took them to court. The company did go out of business after a few years because they tried that with many other employees and eventually led to an investigation by the government, according to an old co-worker I bumped into years later. Story 3. Worked at a restaurant as a server. We just catered a large wedding reception. The owner's wife was chatting with the wedding party all night and occasionally getting the drinks. At the end of the night, she said she's taking her share of the tips since she helps so much. I say fine, even though that's illegal in our state. An hour and a half later, the party ends and the restaurant is still a mess, and the owner's wife is just standing around talking while I was supposed to clean up. It was almost midnight, and I'd worked my other job earlier that day. I walked out without saying a word. They ended up giving me all my tips on my last check. Story 4. Getting reprimanded for not pushing a patient into getting a dental procedure he didn't need or want. Story 5. I worked at McDonald's when I was 16. We used to get a free McDouble, or hot and spicy, with a small fries and drink for our lunch break. One day I went on break and the franchise owner was there and he noticed I asked for cheese on the hot and spicy. He attempted to make me pay for the whole meal because cheese wasn't free. I thought he was joking, so I laughed and started walking towards the break room until he yelled at me not to walk away from him in front of customers and coworkers. I couldn't believe it. This grown-ass successful businessman was hounding a 16-year-old for a slice of cheese. I told him I wasn't going to pay, put the food down, and walked out. They tried calling me to come work that weekend. I told them no thanks and never went back. Story 6. I worked for a placement agency at a manufacturing facility. I'd worked 7 of my 8-hour day when one of the supervisors came by to ask anyone on the crew I was on if they would stay for another 4 hours. We all looked at each other and politely declined. They came back one more time to ask again. We declined. Then they came back and demanded that one of us stay behind for the 4-hour shift, or all of us were going to be written up for attendance. This pissed everyone off, but because we were work placement instead of employees, we were unsure who to talk to. Some of the other crew told the supervisor they can't because they had to pick up their kids, etc. When the supervisor left, the crew had multiple people saying that they can't get written up again or they would lose their job. I had scheduled a dinner with my in-laws, so I called the husband and told him the situation and that I would stay. Told the crew I'll stay, don't worry. Told the supervisor, got put on another crew that had work for 1 hour but was required to stay for the full 4 hours. Next day, I called the main office and explained the situation. I was told they have a lot of attendance issues. Again, I explained I had never had attendance issues, and everyone on my crew was threatened with being written up for not staying 4 hours after their scheduled shift. On-site representative still defended the actions of the supervisor and threw attitude at me. Fine. I don't need you. I quit. And that's the story of how I learned about my workers' rights and workplace harassment. Story 7. I had a very stressful job and was expected to answer Slack messages from my boss at any time or I would be fired. He was in a different time zone, so I often would be woken up at 3 a.m. being yelled at to do something. One day in the office, he was talking shit about me on Slack and accidentally posted it to a channel I was in. I was killing myself for this guy and he didn't even appreciate it. I packed up and left. Best thing I'd ever done. Story 8. Not me, but a middle-aged tradesman where I work. I work underground and it isn't for everybody. Terrible environment and whatnot. This particular individual started working after a few weeks, decided that it wasn't for him. Bad conditions and hostile supervisor. He approached the boss in the morning meeting and told him that he wasn't going underground and that he was quitting. The boss told him that he would have to give him 2 weeks notice, and without missing a beat, the guy replied, "For the next 2 weeks, you're going to notice I'm not here." Turned around, packed his shit, and left. Was never heard from again. Story 9. I had a boss scream, "This is a dictatorship," and I'm the dictator in a meeting while slamming his fist on the desk. Story 10. I got blamed for something that wasn't my fault. It was an argument with our VP or marketing because I had the audacity to suggest a solution that would have avoided our problem instead of accepting fault for something I didn't do. He told me he doesn't pay me to think, so that was my last day. Story 11. I had a job about 10 years ago doing tech support for an ISP for a week. The pay was minimum wage plus bonuses you earned for selling people stuff. And by stuff, I mean terrible, overpriced services that you can get online for free. I was still in the phase of training where I had a supervisor listening in on my calls, and after a call, he told me that I should have paused and tried to sell him some shitty antivirus service before I fixed his problem. Handed in my headset right there. Felt so skeevy when people call you for help and you have to turn into a telemarketer. Story 12. Walked into the interview. Everything went well. Accepted the job offer. Went to the front desk to do the paperwork and noticed that the contract had a different pay amount and that I would be interning for the first month for $100 a week. I asked first about the amount difference. Was told, "Oh, this is the standard contract. It just hasn't been updated for your specific offer." I told them that they'd need to edit and initial the changes before I would sign. "Oh, that's not how things work here." I thanked them for the time and left without signing anything. They called me back on the day I was supposed to have started, asking where I was. I told them because I didn't sign the contract, I was never an employee. Oh boy, that was a fun call.